Hey everyone, I'm Leslie from Books, Gurs, and Purrs. Today I'm going to be talking about episode 2 of Interview with a Vampire. It's called, I wrote it down, After the Phantoms of Your Former Self. So once again, the title of the episode is just text ripped from the first book and used as a title, which I've really been enjoying. I've been completely fangirling over that. Before we continue, I'm just going to say a little disclaimer. Do not watch this if you have not watched the episode and you haven't read the books. And when I mention the books, I discuss from the first book, Interview with the Vampire, all the way to Blackwood Farm, because that's as far as I've read. I think that's like the 10th or 11th book in the Anne Rice series, the Vampire Chronicles. Sorry, I'm tired. So if you haven't read them, you don't want to watch this. I'm making this review series just to fangirl out and to discuss with other fans of the books. So you've been warned. All right, so the first scene opens up with journalist Daniel Malloy looking at a very old portrait, very rare. No, not portrait, I'm sorry. There's some sort of painting, I can't remember. And it's of Marius. So that's, I think, the first mention of Marius in the series. Marius is also a vampire. And it's those little comments here and there that I really enjoy. We also get some insight into Rashid. I think he refers to Luis being a vampire as being a god. So we get some understanding of who he is, where he is coming from. But I wonder how many people know about Luis or vampires that are human. It just seems that Rashid's belief in Louis as a god is headed down the direction of being a part of a cult in a way. So that's what kind of alarms went off in my head when I was watching that section of the scene. This episode is very much Daniel Malloy having dinner with a vampire, not just an interview. And with all the money that Louise has now, there is this course after course after course of different foods that he's, knowing Louise has probably really put a lot of thought into the food that he's created for Daniel. And when Louis comes in the room to join Daniel for their meal, I really love the visual of Louis sitting down, and as he sits down, you see that the table is a reflective surface, and you see Louis like reflected in the table, and that made me think about a couple of things. There's two sides to him. He's presenting himself in one way to Daniel. Daniel's across the table. Does this also signal that he sees Daniel as food? And also just the nature of who Louis is at his core, which is just someone that's really like torn as a character about his vampire existence. The story takes off from there, and we go back to the end of the episode 1 where Louis becomes a vampire, and there's this macabre, humorous scene between Lestat and Louis, and you see that Louis is in pain as he goes through the transition of being a vampire, juxtaposed against Lestat, who is just walking along at his own pace, not really paying any mind to Louis. Again, it's been so long since he's been turned into a vampire, so I feel like instead of showing any empathy, it's not that he doesn't have any, he's just like going through the motions, like, oh yeah, you'll be over your pain soon type of thing. And it's just a really humorous scene against these two terrible things happening. Louis' human body dying and Lestat disposing of bodies. The humor continues because now Lestat teaches Louis how to hunt and eat. I have one question. I'm going to ask now because I don't know if I'm wrong, but so Louis becomes a vampire and Lestat telepathically talks to him. And I know that Louis can't hear, right? No. Lestat can't hear Louis' thoughts, but it seems like he could still talk to him telepathically in a way, if that makes any sense. So I don't know if that was a goof at the beginning of the episode or if that's meant to be in there. Louis and Lestat go home, and Louis takes his food home with him, and it's still this really like humorous tone that continues, where we see that Louis is learning how to be a vampire, and the way Lestat talks to him is hilarious. For instance, when he tells him, "Oh, don't bite the blood, suck the blood." It was just, sorry, it just really tickled me. But immediately after, we get a sense of the issues that are to come. The fact that Luis doesn't like the feeling he has after. He probably has so much guilt about killing someone. So he runs out of the home of Lestat. And this is also where I noticed two things are going on. One is that Louis is really holding on to his guilt over what he's done, and Lestat isn't communicating how Louis should move in the world. This is something that I remember from the books, which is that so many conflicts between Louis and Lestat could have been avoided if Lestat just communicated better. That's always been at the core issue of their relationship. Now, as we flash forward back to Dubai with Daniel and Luis having dinner, they're having a bit of a conflict in their conversation because Daniel Malloy, I feel like because he's an interviewer and a seasoned journalist, he could see a lot more easily at times how much of an issue the power dynamic between Lestat and Luis is, and maybe he sees Louis as someone that was caged in that relationship. Something that I really enjoyed about this conversation between Daniel and Louis is that Daniel Malloy's character is eating all these different courses of meals with different animals being cooked, right? In contrast to Louis, who's also feasting on humans in various ways. And as I see them together, I almost feel like it's a little bit of a game of chicken in a way, where I feel like Louis is maybe challenging Daniel to really see him, and maybe Daniel sees what Louis is doing and wants to just make it really clear that he's not afraid of him. And that's why he's also eating his food so casually in front of Louis. He doesn't want to show that he's fearful or that he could be easily manipulated. Back in Storyville, Louis and Lestat go for a stroll, and Lestat teaches Louis his telepathic powers, which is I feel like that's a change from the books, because what I remember from the books is that Louis couldn't use telepathy, or if that's what he couldn't read anyone's mind. And so that's a change from the books that pays off later, and I see why they did it, but it's a change from the books that I enjoy. Louis visits his mother, Florence, and now that he has his telepathy, he's listening into his mom's thoughts, and you really get a very clear sense that Louis's mom is not okay with him being gay and being in a relationship with Lestat. It's just this unspoken thing, but that definitely creates a chasm between Louis and his mother. As Luis's family grows, because his sister is going to have children now, Luis has big dreams of having his own establishment. And with this not quite official business meeting he has with another man, he has to deal with the racist pandering of this other individual. And this is where like two of my favorite lines of the episode come up. And that's the fact that Luis says about the other guy that he's dabbling in fuckery, which just like took me out. I thought that was hilarious right before he murders a man. And but you see, this is a person that is just so frustrated with the circumstances that he's affronted with, and he has all this vampiric power, but he lives in a society that doesn't even treat him as equal as a human being. So it's just like this constant like bubbling of frustration. And so this, I think, also adds to the conflict with Lestat, because when he's trying to talk to Lestat about what happened, there's like this complete misunderstanding of each other. And then the second line of that's my favorite of the episode comes from Lestat, where he calls Louis a library of confusion. And it's funny, but it also comes from someone that just in episode 1 said that he sees Louis. He goes, "I see you." But I don't think he fully does, because if he really did, he would be more empathetic to what he has to deal with day in and day out. Like, what are his vampire powers for if he can't really be as free as he wants to be because of where they're at? So that was just something that was sticking in my mind. As funny as their dynamic is, there's also this constant like hitting heads, I feel like, where Lestat wants Louis to be more lighthearted and move on, and not really acknowledging what Louis is going through. So that was just something to note. To make peace with Louis, Lestat decides to go into business with him by buying the Fair Play brothel that was there and change it to Azalea Halls. And so it's just this extravagant overture to win Louis back. And something that Lestat warns Luis about is that he's too connected to his humanity, or he keeps trying to embroil himself in something that he needs to let go. And he easily says that, but Lestat is also someone that loves music. Like, he has his own ways through art of staying connected to humanity. So he's a bit of a hypocrite. There's a moment in this particular scene that I thought was really important, was that even though Lestat is going into business with Louis, and the narration is by Luis, and he's saying all these great things that he did for his community, making sure that everyone had essentially a living wage, the people that he's going into business with him are not going to be okay with that. You know, there's always a comment here and there on the ladder that Louis has climbed quickly, you know, even though I'm sure the people that he does business with probably just inherited their wealth as well. But all the things that Luis is doing that are positive, the other white people that he's doing business with, and just, you know, in the government and the city, are clearly just going to want to tear that down. So we're already getting some foreshadowing there. After that scene, Luis is briefly visiting Grace as time has elapsed and she's had her twins. But this is really another moment where there's just like a chipping away at the family dynamics. Early on in the episode, we saw this fracture between him and his mother, and now we're seeing it between him and Grace, because Luis doesn't even trust himself to be around his nephews in fear that he will kill them. But again, this is only because he won't eat in the first place. So he's really creating problems for himself, all the while not letting go of his human family. As the episode toggles back to Dubai with Daniel Malloy and Luis, Louis mentions that he stopped killing people since 2000, and it's interesting that he feels like that's his moral high ground or something to pay attention to, because throughout his meals, I just wonder how moral it is, because he's only conducting himself in a way that he thinks is moral for him to exist. And I wonder what else is going on. How is he acquiring blood from others? I really keep thinking about a cult, like maybe people are worshiping him as a god and offering donations to him. It's something to think about. That's what's on my mind. Something else that Luis mentions, and I don't know if it's going to come up in this season or not, but he did mention that there's a very large connection that could happen that Luis can tap into between him and all the other vampires. It's like this telepathic network that exists. And I wonder if at some point they're gonna do Queen of the Damned. I don't really know where we're in the timeline, because I'm not really aware just yet how much has happened from the books and like in what order. So that's definitely something to consider, because as I'm hearing about this, all I keep thinking about is Akasha. But I don't know. We'll see how much I fangirl as we go on. As the show continues, we go back to Lestat and Luis in the past, and we see that Luis is just so heartbroken over the fact that he knows he's not fully accepting it, but he sees that he can't really be connected to his own family in the way that he wants, and realizes that he'll never have a family of his own. He will never have children. So what he's holding on to once again is the human conventions of how he places value on himself and what he should accomplish, and that would be him running a business, being financially stable as head of household, as well as having his own family, and he just can't do that. And that's something that I really appreciate about both actors in that moment, is just the despair that Luis is in, and also how Lestat reacts to it. You know, it's really beautiful, their relationship. But I also think that when Luis is telling Lestat that, it very much dawns on the character what he's taken away from Luis in a way. And at this point, Lestat introduces Louis to the idea of travel, which is another tip off to what I think is going to happen in season 2 instead of season 1, but we'll see. To try to mend things with Luis, Lestat takes him to the opera, and where Lestat really lets himself be vulnerable and makes it really clear that he doesn't want to be lonely. That actually, I feel like the core of his character is a deep sense of loneliness. You know, he's been a vampire for how long? And the fact that he wants to commit himself to Luis, knowing that they are people that could potentially never die, live for a very long time. It's a lot to ask of another person, but it's something that he very much wants with Luis. But here's the thing, it comes back to what Lestat wants. And although he did this gesture of trying to bring him to the opera, once again we see what Luis has to go through in order for them to spend time together, which is he has to play as if he's below Lestat's station. He has to be behind him. He has to be the one to deal with all the looks that he gets because he's a black man going to this opera, and the only way that he could get in is to be, I think it's called a valet, to be the valet. And so that kind of just circles back right to the beginning of the episode where he's dealing with a businessman that's just pandering to him and saying racist stuff. And then we circle back to towards the end of this episode, and it's just showing us that he's just constantly having to toggle this relationship, his powers, the society that he lives in. And I feel like at times that Lestat could just be more empathetic to that. Like, why did we have to go to the opera? It's not really serving Luis, it's more serving Lestat. As we reach towards the end of the episode, Lestat does not like that one of the opera singers is off key, and that becomes the hunt. And something that is I don't know, a key characteristic of Lestat is that he loves to play with his food. So he takes the opera singer and Louis home and just tortures the man and makes him feel like he's not good enough as a human being, because that's how Lestat sees him, and then murders him. But again, he plays with his food first, and that's something that Luis is not okay with. And so now, even in this relationship that he's in, he's performing for him, which is not good, right? He is really not able to be himself. From there, the episode ends with Daniel Malloy and Luis in Dubai. And speaking of being vulnerable, by the end of this episode, I think that Luis has won in gaining a little bit of trust from Daniel. He lets down his guard and he turns off the laptop, and he just has a very human moment with Luis. And I just keep thinking in the back of my head, I don't know if that's something genuine or not on Luis's part. You know, what's the ultimate manipulation that's going on in that scene, you know? But I'm loving it. I'm loving every episode, and I absolutely love the outfit that Luis is wearing at the end. It was so like tailored, you know, because he just has so much, his character has so much money. But I mean, there's some close-up shots, and I'm really just looking at the pattern and the stitch of it. It's pretty crazy, and I don't know anything about fashion, but it's just gorgeous. All right, everyone, for this episode, I only have one question. There's a scene really early on when Lestat gets in the coffin and Louis lies on top of him. But before that happens, Lestat is just standing, and there's a portrait, an illustrated portrait of a woman behind him. And I'm wondering if that portrait is of his mother. But I don't remember her completely from the books. And I was wondering if anybody else noticed that, and if they knew if that might be her. That was just on my mind, because I don't know what characters they're going to introduce when. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, especially since I have been so focused on wanting to see Luis's family on screen. That was really important to me, seeing his brother Paul on screen, that I really just wasn't focusing on Lestat. And you know, he has his own family as well. There's a bit of a storyline that's not in this one when it comes to Lestat, and I wonder if it's going to come up more in the second season. So, alright, so that's the end of my review. If there's anything that you think of, any questions, or any answers for me from what I asked. Oh, you know what? I have one more. I guess I'm really focusing in on the paintings. I'm going to sneeze. Louis has some paintings in the background. and it looks like a famous paintings beyond the fictionalized painting of Marius. And I wonder what that says about his character. If anybody noticed that and could kind of comment below about it, I'd really appreciate it. And speaking of commenting, if you could please subscribe, like, comments, that would really help me out. Really just for engagement. I would really just like to continue the conversation. So I'd appreciate if you just left a comment below. Alright everyone, I'll try to get another video out shortly in the next couple of days to catch up. I still need to review episode 3, and then I'll finally be on track. What's the other thing? I'm not going to be creating videos like right after. I'm not going to be doing any lives or anything like that. But if you're interested in watching someone immediately talk about Interview the Vampire after the episode, there's Michael from his channel Black Gay Comic Geek. I love him. He's so funny. He's so insightful, and he's definitely someone to check out. There's also Sharonda from Pair Wait. She has not done any live or reviews for Interview the Vampire, but she did say that she will be doing that sometime soon. So I hope she starts watching Interview the Vampire, because it's really good. I cannot stop talking about it. All right, I'll stop talking, and I'll see you later.